So this is a recording about the current economic situation that's happening. We have recently the AIG company that received government funds gave away $165 million in bonus money to their employees for bonuses. These are the same people that sold these junk derivatives that have wrecked the world economy. And so, there's a lot of people who are pretty upset about that in the country in general. Our sort of collective anger is being directed toward that to some extent. And, the president's doing his best to try to, do what we can with this financial mess, but then we have this kind of stuff going on. So, we'll take a look at what's happened in the world, recently with the transits. Now, let's take a look at a few things. For one thing, the wealth of a country, or wealth in general, the concept of wealth is related to Jupiter. And so, Jupiter's in Capricorn, he's debilitated, and he's with Rahu, the North Node. So this shows why, in general, wealth is kind of confusing and frightening, and we're not feeling very abundant. The banks included aren't lending. They're holding on to their money, even though they're getting all this financial assistance. This is one of the problems with why the bailout, quote, is not really helping the economy so much, because the banks aren't lending, even though we're giving it to them. And that's this Jupiter in Capricorn with Rahu. It's sort of tight-fisted. Now, what's changed is Mars moved into Aquarius on the 7th of March, about 10 days ago. Since then, it's gone into Aquarius, which is a sign related to the social collective, so to speak, and it's joined Mercury, which is the planet of money. Mercury is really the planet of cash, having money in your hand. Wealth, or the concept of wealth, is Jupiter. How rich the country is, or how much wealth you have, is related to Jupiter. But the money in your hand, the cash you have, the liquid assets and stuff like that, in general, what you do with the money, what you spend it on and stuff, is really related to Mercury. Mercury's money in general. And Mars has joined that, and it's in Aquarius, which is a sign, as I said, of the social consciousness. So now Mars, Mercury, in Aquarius, the sort of social mindset is on money, and we're angry about what's happened to our money. Now we're like, okay, what's going on here? When Mars was in Capricorn, we were taking some courageous actions to increase the nation's wealth, so to speak, and prosperity with passing this legislation. We had Mars, Jupiter, and Rahu were just here, so Mars was courageously trying to take that on. Now he's in Aquarius, and we're angry. He's joined Mercury. It's not exalted Mars anymore. Now it's in Aquarius, where there's more tendency to get irritated, especially about ideas, because it's an air sign. So this shows this sort of transformation. Now, Venus just turned retrograde as well. Same day Mars went into Aquarius, Venus turned retrograde. So at the same time that we had this news of what's been happening with our money, which we just got over the weekend with this AIG bailout and whatnot, or this AIG bonus pay, we also last week had a huge stock rally in the stock market. Venus went retrograde, and this has seemed to, it was an obvious shift. There's been some hope, confidence. I've said so many times, it's really hard to predict a retrograde planet, but it tends to reverse what was happening before. In the case of Venus, it does refer to affluence. Prosperity is a real word of Venus, prosperity. And that's the feeling that things are more abundant, or we're more content with what we have. This is a general concept, but that can definitely translate into being more generous. And I made the prediction that I was asked on my blog on the 4th, March 4th, when I talked about Venus retrograde in sidereal Pisces, whether or not I thought the real estate market would improve, because it's going to be in the 4th house from the U.S. chart. And I said this: her entrance in the 4th house can already be measured as not having much of a positive influence on housing. And then I went on to say this, that Jupiter's difficulties had more to do with that. So Venus retrograde and housing, yes, I'm stalling. Well, I think a doubly cruel house lord in good dignity will be a plus. Moving forward, her power to harm as 6th house was greater, which means that while Venus was moving forward, her power to harm, maybe the wealth was a bit greater because it was in such a high dignity as the 6th house. But now going retrograde, I'm not sure real estate will improve yet. I think Mars joins her direct, that's more likely, which is going to be April 14th. Mars will join Venus in Pisces, so there might be an uptick in real estate then. In April, when Jupiter, well, let me just go down to what I said technically about Venus. I said that, that Venus retrograde may help with increased lending, though. I think it's one of the main problems. The government keeps giving banks money and they're not lending any of it. So I said that I think it might help with lending, and you know, I didn't mention I didn't mention the stock market, but I hope that it will translate into that. But certainly some prosperity, I think, is indicated by Venus going retrograde. Let's see if it brings about more lending. It might be hard to tell because we don't get these reports for at least about a month or so later. But beyond that, this increase in stock, or at least the stock market going up since Venus went retrograde, seems to be a positive indicator. Let's hope it keeps that way. You know, it's hard to tell. Retrograde planets are very unpredictable, and it's hard to tell whether it would keep it up, but hopefully there will be some confidence now in the banking sector, especially since the bailout money is coming through, and there seems to be maybe a little more confidence. You might start to see some lending increase now. We'll keep our eye on that, because, you know, I have made the prediction. I could have maybe extended that to say that the stock market would improve. I was replying to my blog, and I often write answers quickly. I actually thought that I did predict that the stock market would increase, because that was in my mind, but I didn't write it, so either way it doesn't matter. It's not that important that I get these predictions right. That's not my big goal. It's mainly to show how things are working, but I definitely felt like in general finances could improve. I didn't think it would affect the housing market yet, but that lending could be improved, and definitely stock market could improve as well, because it would reverse the trend. And when Venus went into Pisces, the stock market started to tank. I mean, not immediately, but it hadn't shown any improvement. And in fact, recently, you know, the stock market hit its all-time low since, not all-time, but since like 1997 or something, right before Venus went retrograde. So when Venus started to slow down and stop in the sky, that's when the stock market hit a 10-year low, and then Venus turns retrograde and it rallies. So let's see if that continues while Venus goes retrograde and starts some positive financial momentum in the economy. But I wanted to show the difference about what's happened recently. When Mars and Mercury were in Capricorn, this is when we were passing the bill and arguing about passing the bailout, but we did it, and it was, you know, an act of courage and power, concentrated effort while it was all in Capricorn. Then now that Mars is in Aquarius with Mercury, there's a sort of collective irritation and anger about how our money has been spent. And Mars-Mercury conjunction, Rahu and Jupiter are still there, so the banks aren't lending. The wealth is still being hung up. But we did see a rally in the stock market with Venus going retrograde. Hopefully that will lead to increased lending. So that's an interesting trend. Venus just went retrograde, you know, last week. That's when we saw its effects in the stock market. It was actually Friday the 7th, or Friday the 6th. So last week was the first full week on the stock market that Venus was retrograde, and it made a big recovery.